I'm going to draw a line under this because we also made a promise, and that promise was we would get to the forestry issue. This is Q&A. We're live from Hobart. Our next question tonight comes from Gail Sorbian.
My question is directed to Terry Edwards first. What, in your opinion, will happen to the forest industry in Tasmania if the campaign by radical groups successfully convince overseas markets not to purchase wood products from here? There is a high demand for wood products in Australia, and people will be forced to obtain these from other countries with poor or no forest management. What plans would you like to implement to create a balanced industry?
Okay, the bottom line of that question was, what in your opinion will happen to the forest industry in Tasmania if the campaign by radical groups is successful, environmental groups? We'll start with you, Terry Edwards, briefly.
It's hard to be brief on this, Tony.
I know, we haven't got much time.
Okay. If the overseas campaigns continue and are successful, as they have been in part to date, the forest industry in Tasmania will eventually implode. The industry is an integrated number of different components that make up the whole. If you take any one of those components out, you undermine the viability of the whole. We've largely lost the woodchip export industry, and again that was on the back of campaigning in our overseas markets by environmental groups. We've now seen Ta'an, who was attracted down here to Tasmania by the Tasmanian and Commonwealth governments, who were asked to invest here, and they too have been subject to a quite dishonourable campaign in Japan by extremist environmental groups. It has cost them 2 contracts to date and cost 49 Tasmanians today their jobs. They lost their jobs today as a direct result of that campaign. If we use the capacity to use the lower grade timber that's taken off a coop that's being harvested to produce saw logs, we will lose the industry as a whole. If we lose the industry as a whole, that is 5,000 jobs, that is $750 million each and every year in generated wealth in this state that we cannot afford to lose.
Terry, you can't blame. Terry, I agree with you that we need to get our industry back on a sustainable footing, but you can't blame a handful of activists overseas for the fact that the industry is on its knees at the moment. There are many reasons why the industry...
You can say to people that are going overseas that they're actually destroying jobs in Tasmania, and the government has said that we shouldn't have people going overseas trashing the brand of Tasmania, because Tasmanians have got a lot to be proud of on a whole range of issues, and I don't think it helps the Tasmanian economy to have anybody overseas saying things about Tasmania.
Okay, just before we hear from the rest of the panel, we've got a question in the audience from a very different perspective. It's from Irina Lucas. Irina, let's get a microphone to you. Go ahead.
A willingness to dismiss reports based on scientific investigation has led me to believe that we are entering a new dark age. Self-interested groups like Forestry Tasmania have been plundering our rich old-growth forests at unsustainable levels. Politicians who, with their party political ego babble, their spin, their 3-word slogans and stints, and promote this sort of banality, and they're supported by a vacancy in our media. When will Forestry Tasmania and our politicians cut the crap, and when will the media do the same?
Okay, let's hear from the rest of our panel. Natasha Chicha, first of all.
I'm really worried by some of the tone of some of the comments around the question, that last question, because there were some people muttering rude comments, hissing, basically saying sit down. You're entitled to express that opinion. So is Terry. So is the other person who asked the question. What really worries me about the toxic nature of the forestry debate in Tasmania at the moment, and it's not the first time it's been toxic, is the way that we Tasmanians are turning against each other. I'm worried for our society, for our civil society, and for the way that we are speaking to and not listening to each other. So the kind of language that Julie used is more of the kind of language I would like to hear in this debate. I don't think words like terrorist, for example, which has popped up in the public discourse in the last week or so, are in any way helpful to getting us all moving forwards together. I do not think the personal attacks on Professor Jonathan West in relation to the executive summary of his report were in any way defensible. I found them to be completely unacceptable in a society that considers itself grown up. We need to get better at having a grown-up conversation about this. Nobody is going to be happy with the outcome, completely happy, but more of us can be more happy, and we need to think of ourselves as a community.
I'm just going to go back to Terry Edwards, because I think you did make the terrorist comments. It is a problem, isn't it, when you have a professor who produces a report, the report is totally rejected by the industry, not necessarily by the community.
Well, the industry hasn't rejected the report. A part of the industry has made some comments about the accuracy or otherwise of Professor West's report, and they quite rightly called into question a number of the facts in his report. They are inaccurate. They're directly inconsistent with the scientific technical information that was included in the reports that he himself presented to the Tasmanian and Commonwealth governments. He was wrong, in fact, and that can be proved. I don't have to go through that now, but that is a fact. Now, I have not come out and criticised Professor West for the comments he made. I think they were ill-advised, and I think some of the comments and the so-called facts that he relied on were inaccurate. Now, back to the question that Irina asked about refusal to accept scientific facts. No one has rejected the scientific reports that were produced to the two governments by Professor West. The only criticism has been drawn about his decision to break with what he told everyone he was going to do. He said a number of times he would not produce any recommendations or make any commentary about the way forward from here. What he would simply do is deliver 5 scientific reports. He did that. Now, the parties to the negotiations process are going through 2,500 pages of quite complex scientific information, and we're trying to understand it, and then we'll try and do what Natasha says. We'll try and sit down. But from my organisation's point of view, we won't do that while we've got a gun being held at our head by people who are destroying my members' markets in overseas countries. Soon as that stops, the negotiations process that Natasha wants and the sensible, mature conversation can resume. Okay. It has actually been quite mature for 2 years.
I heard you on the radio last week, and you said you would not negotiate with the environmental groups unless they stopped campaigning against you.
That's right.
It seems to me that in a democracy, protest, free speech, these things are treasured.
Yep.
And I find it problematic for you to refuse to engage in any conversation.
Before you respond to that, we've got a video from a protester perched at the top of a tree in southern Tasmania. Let's hear from her.
My name is Miranda Gibson, and I'm currently 60 metres at the top of an old-growth tree in southern Tasmania. I've been at the top of this tree for 110 days, watching over these high conservation value forests that were due to be protected in August last year. Yet they're still subject to logging.
Now, her name is Miranda Gibson, Terry Edwards, and she actually went on to offer you a deal. She said she'd be prepared, or their group would be prepared, to stop logging or to stop protesting logging in the area.
They've already stopped the logging.
That's honestly incorrect. If you agree to stop logging in the 572,000 hectares of identified high conservation value forest, they'll call off their market boycott. That's what she went on to say. Would you be prepared to do that in order to sit down and have that negotiation?
Look, I'm not going to give a definitive answer to that because that was put to us formally today, and I need to go through a process within my membership to come up with a complete answer to the proposal that's been put. But I think if I go to the question Brian put to me about the...
just to pause, just put that on pause for a second. I mean, are you suggesting you've heard about this today, but you would be prepared to consider it?
Oh, of course we will consider it. If it's realistic and if it will give us the opportunity and the space to produce an outcome. But we have to evaluate the various components. I mean, this was an integrated package that was put to us today. It wasn't just we're going to stop and you come back into the talks. There was a lot more to it than that, including the fact that the area that had to be vacated for this to occur just suddenly grew from 430,000 hectares to 572,000 hectares since the campaign started. Now, I don't know, it doesn't seem to me to be a very good peace offering when you up the ante on your claim. Now, if I can go back to Brian's point, because I think it is important. I did an interview on the 7:30 report last week, and it's largely from that the commentary on the radio came. And in that I was asked a question about what we wanted to achieve by way of making sure that any outcome from this process was durable. And I talked about a range of different things, including a legislative package to stop illegal protests. I also talked about making environmental organisations subjected to exactly the same laws that apply to everyone else in the community. Things like the Trade Practices Act, the Australian Competition and Consumer Act, truth in advertising laws, all of which environmental organisations are exempt from and exploit on a daily basis in a completely unfair way that creates a non-level playing field that we're required to play on, but we're kicking uphill every single quarter. And it is becoming quite difficult. Now, we can't fight back against the campaigns. There's a classic case of defamation that's been identified by our barrister that we're not able to run because the Tasmanian government changed the law so that a corporation cannot take action against an individual or a not-for-profit organisation under our defamation.
Let's pause for a minute. I'll hear from Andrew Wilkie on this. Is there a way of lowering the temperature on this dispute so you can actually get a resolution?
Well, Tony, there has to be, because the status quo is not an option. We cannot continue the way we're doing it, because at the moment some of the most precious forests on the planet are being logged, and on the other side of the barricades we have forestry workers who are losing their jobs, who are worried about their jobs, who are worried about the jobs that will be there for their children. The status quo is not an option, but I'm concerned by the direction of this conversation, because it seems to be all about activists and activists in foreign markets, and that they are solely responsible for the fact that the industry's on its knees. The industry's on its knees for many reasons, including the high Australian dollar, including the fact that wood chips out of South America and Asia are so much cheaper for foreign consumers.
So we can't have people calling out from the audience. You want to put your hand up, we might try and get a microphone to you.
The fact that Professor West has revealed that we've been overlogging our forests now for decades, the fact that we've been writing contracts which we can't supply even from the current forestry areas. There are countless reasons why the industry is on its knees, and we all need to get around a table and sort it out.
Well,
and we all have to be prepared to give a bit.
All right, hold on, we're just going to go to this person with their hand up there.
I just want to say, I don't know how you can sit there and make comments about forests in Tasmania being the most precious in the world and claim to have a global view on these things. If you opened your eyes up to what's happening elsewhere, even in our own region, you don't even have to travel very far. All those people sitting in trees in Tasmania flew over East Malaysia, flew over Borneo and Kalimantan. Don't they care about the trees and the species that are disappearing there all the time? Do you think they've got the same sort of legislation we've got here, or the same sort of rigorous controls, or the same sort of media scrutiny, or the number of politicians, the number of journalists we've got in Tasmania?
Okay, we're running out of time, so you've got to come to an end.
What's far worse than here?